Welcome back to the channel. It was the summer of 1985, deep in the misty forests of Washington state. A man named Daniel Carter, a quiet, solitary hiker, set out on a trail he'd walked dozens of times before. But what he found on that warm July afternoon would spiral into one of the most unsettling mysteries of his life. Pinned to the rough bark of a cedar tree, halfway hidden beneath moss, was a Polaroid photograph. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, just another forgotten snapshot someone had tacked to a tree as a joke or marker. But when Daniel pulled it free, his heart stopped. The picture wasn't of the forest. It wasn't of strangers. It was of him. There, in grainy Polaroid clarity, was Daniel fast asleep in his own bed. The thin quilt pulled to his chest, the lamp by his nightstand glowing faintly. His mouth was slightly open, the way it always was when he was deep in a dream. He knew the photo wasn't from some old memory. He'd never taken it. He lived alone, and no one, absolutely no one, had a key to his home. At first, he tried to laugh it off, telling himself it must be a trick of resemblance. But the more he looked, the harder it became to deny. The details were exact. The chipped headboard, the clock with its missing second hand, the small tear in the curtain, and most horrifying of all, the date scrawled on the back. It was from 2 nights ago. Daniel Carter was the kind of man people described as private, but kind. At 37 years old, he worked as a surveyor for the state, spending most of his time walking timberland and measuring property lines. His small house sat on the edge of a quiet town, surrounded by woods that he had always found more comforting than people. He wasn't a drinker. He wasn't the type to cause trouble. He liked routine, silence, and the steady rhythm of hiking trails. On weekends, he ventured into the deeper forests of Washington with a small pack, a compass, and a Polaroid camera of his own. Photography was his one hobby, though most of his pictures were of trees, rivers, and clouds. He never liked photographing people. So when he saw his own face staring back at him from the photograph on that tree, something inside him cracked. It wasn't just that the image had been taken inside his bedroom. It was that he looked so vulnerable, so unaware, lying there in the darkness while someone stood over him with a camera. Someone had been inside his home. Someone had been watching him sleep. That night, Daniel hardly slept. He checked every lock. Twice, then 3 times. He pushed a chair against the door and sat awake in the living room with a baseball bat across his lap. Every creak of the floorboards made his skin crawl. Every shifting shadow outside his window made him hold his breath. Around 3:17 a.m., as the old clock ticked in the silence, Daniel swore he heard the faint sound of a camera shutter. Not in his house, not close, but distant, echoing in the trees beyond his window. He stood frozen, gripping the bat, waiting for the noise again, but the forest had gone silent. No crickets, no wind, just that heavy stillness that presses in when something is watching. By dawn, his nerves were shot. He checked his home from top to bottom. Nothing missing, nothing out of place. And yet the dread remained, thick in his chest. He thought about going to the police, but what would he say? That he found a Polaroid of himself in the woods? That he heard a phantom camera in the night? They'd laugh. They'd tell him it was a prank, but it didn't feel like a prank. It felt like a warning. Over the next week, Daniel tried to return to his routine. He went to work. He hiked. He told himself it was nothing. But then, on another trail, 5 miles deeper into the forest, he found a second photograph. This one was taped to the inside of a hollow stump. It showed him sitting at his kitchen table, eating breakfast. The angle was wrong for the window. It had been taken from inside the house. His heart raced as he flipped it over. The date was written again. Yesterday. The realization hit him like a blow. These photos weren't old, they were recent. Someone was entering his home, again and again, watching him, photographing him, leaving proof like breadcrumbs for him to find. Over the next month, he found 5 more photographs scattered through the forest. One showed him brushing his teeth. Another showed him putting on his boots. One was so close it captured the stubble on his chin as he tied his laces. Each one bore a date, always within the last 48 hours, but the most disturbing came one morning when he hiked off trail, drawn by an unshakable instinct. Beneath a rotting log, pinned with a rusty nail, was a Polaroid of him standing exactly where he was at that very moment, hiking into the forest, pack on his shoulders. The angle was perfect, as though the picture had been taken just minutes earlier. His blood turned to ice. Whoever was doing this wasn't just breaking into his home. They were following him. Daniel stopped sleeping altogether. His coworkers noticed his exhaustion, the way his hands shook when he tried to hold a cup of coffee. He brushed it off, saying he wasn't feeling well. But the truth was, every time he closed his eyes, he imagined the click of a camera, the shadow of someone leaning over him, watching, waiting. He tried setting traps, flour on the floor, strings across doors, nails along the window ledges. Nothing was disturbed. And yet, every few days, another photograph appeared in the woods. Some of them were close-ups of his face as he slept. Others were distant shots of his silhouette against the curtain. A few showed him sitting in the dark, clutching the baseball bat, eyes wide with fear, as though the photographer wanted him to know he was never alone. Daniel began to unravel. He started speaking to himself, muttering in the empty rooms of his house, daring the intruder to show themselves. He ripped the curtains down, boarded the windows, nailed the doors shut. But somehow the photos kept coming. One August night, a storm rolled through the forest. Rain pounded the roof. Wind howled through the trees. Daniel sat awake, flashlight in one hand, bat in the other. Around midnight, the power went out. That was when he heard it, the soft flutter of paper beneath the front door. He didn't move for nearly an hour, just listening to the storm. Finally, he forced himself to check. On the floor, half soaked with rain, lay a Polaroid dot. It showed him sitting exactly where he was now, on the couch. Flashlight in hand, bat across his lap. The date written on the back was tonight. Daniel dropped the photo and scrambled through the dark house, shouting into the storm, demanding the intruder reveal themselves. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest through the window. For a brief second, he swore he saw a figure standing among the trees, a tall, thin silhouette holding something in its hand. By the time he opened the door, the figure was gone. Weeks bled into months. Daniel stopped going to work. His phone went unanswered. His mailbox overflowed. Neighbors whispered about the man who'd become a recluse. His windows boarded, his yard overgrown. Inside, Daniel surrounded himself with the photographs. He pinned them to the walls, laid them across the floor, studied them for patterns, clues, anything, but there was nothing. No reflections of the photographer in mirrors, no shadows out of place, no evidence of how they entered or exited. Yet the collection grew. Dozens of photographs, hundreds. Some he found nailed to trees. Others slipped under his door. A few appeared inside his locked bedroom. On the nightstand beside him when he woke. His once tidy home became a shrine of paranoia. Every surface covered in images of himself, smiling, sleeping, eating, walking, staring into the distance. A life documented not by his own hand, but by some unseen presence that seemed determined to erase the boundary between privacy and exposure. In December of 1985, during the first snowfall of the year, a neighbor called the police. They hadn't seen Daniel in weeks. His lights burned at all hours. Something felt wrong. When authorities entered the house, they found no sign of Daniel Carter. What they did find were photographs. Thousands of them, covering every wall, stacked in boxes, scattered across the floors. Most were of Daniel. But in the very center of his living room wall, pinned with a hunting knife, was one final Polaroid dot. It showed Daniel asleep in his bed. And behind him, half hidden in shadow, was a figure tall, thin, face obscured. Holding a camera, Daniel Carter was never seen again. To this day, hikers in the Washington forests whisper about the photograph in the woods. Some claim to have found Polaroids pinned to trees, grainy pictures of strangers they don't recognize. Others say they've heard the faint click of a camera when walking alone. Though no one is there. The photographs collected from Daniel's home remain locked away in evidence storage, too disturbing for public release. But a rumor persists. If you stare at them long enough, if you flip through the hundreds of images back to back, a figure slowly begins to emerge in the background. A figure that gets closer and closer, until it's standing directly behind Daniel and staring straight into the lens. And maybe, just maybe, it isn't staring at him at all. Maybe it's staring at whoever dares to look.